What if a single word in the Bible was never meant to be there?
What if that one mistranslation shaped how entire cultures understand love, faith, and identity?
That mistranslation happened in 1946, and for decades it has been repeated, defended, and weaponized.
Now we're tracing how that moment continues to echo across churches, classrooms, and countries. We're exploring how misinformation about Scripture spreads and how critical thinking, education, and honest dialogue can help us see the bigger picture.
This is the 1946 Culture Shift Tour, UK, a journey through language, belief, and the stories that shape us. In this episode of the 1946 Culture Shift Tour, UK, we're taking on one of the most urgent discussions of our time.
We're joined by Saba Ali, activist, speaker, and chair of Ban Conversion Practices Coalition, whose work sits at the intersection of faith, culture, identity, and justice.
Saba brings lived experience and frontline advocacy to a conversation many people still misunderstand, because these are not therapies. These are harmful practices that continue to impact lives around the UK, the United States, and beyond.
Together, we talk about why language matters, why bans are still being delayed, how race, religion shape those experiences, and why survivors' voices must be heard.
We talk about truth, dignity, and the fight to make sure no one is told they need to be fixed.
You don't want to miss this informative episode with Saba Ali. Hello and welcome. We're welcoming the wonderful Saba Ali on this episode today. Really, really excited to have you here with us. My path with Saba obviously has been through the work we do, advocacy work here in the UK, as well as specifically UK Black Pride, because that's our community, that's where we build family. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to have you here with us today, Saba. You know, you're a human rights extraordinaire, dare I say that, but it's true. So by way of introduction, and for people that don't know you, maybe you could start with a little bit of an introduction of your backstory, a little bit of your lived experience, and just, give us a bit of your background story for the audience who are listening today.
Sure. Well, thanks, Josie and Rocky, for having me. This is very exciting and something I'm really passionate about, so it's great to be here. Do you know, I find it really difficult to answer the question, who am I? Because I think it kind of changes on a daily basis. So I think there are several me, or as someone said recently, like, how many clones are there of you? So in terms of roles, I'm an activist, public speaker, and a consultant. My lived experience is childhood trauma and cultural abuse. So I grew up in a Muslim household. I'm not practicing, but I sort of had that experience. I had I didn't have a relationship with my mother. It was a very abusive relationship. And I kind of turned that pain into my advocacy today. So that's sort of my lived experience and why I do the work I do today. And for me, it's really important that as a South Asian queer woman of colour, there's other layers to me, like obviously growing up in faith, having hidden disabilities, that I speak up for those sort of marginalised women and groups that don't have a voice. So, I think my activism started when I was about 13 with the anti-apartheid movement. You can't see it, but I have my anti-apartheid mug just up there on the left, which I still have and I still look at. I remember getting stickers and I won't say where I stuck them. But yeah, so I think advocacy and that kind of activism has always been in my blood. I've always wanted to. So I think, and aside from that, what I do today, I should mention, because people will probably be annoyed if I don't. You mentioned UK Black Pride, which I'm really proud to be a part of, and it's an amazing family to be a part of. And I'm also chair for the Ban Conversion Practices Coalition, which is why it's great to have this conversation. And I actually sit on the coalition as a representative for UK Black Pride, which is brilliant. I'm also trustee for Diva Charity, for Building Bridges for Peace, and there's a little list of things that I do. But ultimately, I see myself as a kind of defiant woman that's against oppression, that speaks out about injustice. I don't know if I'm quite a human rights activist quite yet. I feel like a bit of an imposter saying that, but I definitely speak up for the underdog. And for me, it's really important to speak up for those who don't have a voice. For a long time, there's an artist called Loki, whose music I found about 10, 12 years ago. And he wrote a song years ago called Voice of the Voiceless. And the meaning behind that song, talking about people that are passed or gone by who don't have a voice and representing them, that song, that Voice of the Voiceless, is a phrase that I've used for a long time because of what he wrote about and what he spoke about. That really resonates with me. It is speaking up for those that don't have a voice. I see myself as quite privileged to have the kind of layered intersections that I have, that I can have a platform and I can speak up today.
Amazing. And thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, but also very modest. You've done incredible stuff. I mean, it's if people only just have to look you up and they'll see exactly what we mean. And absolutely, you should call yourself a human rights activist. Like, come on. I just literally, before the session, I messaged Rocky and I went, have you seen the list of stuff that Saba's done? Like, jack of all trades, and you absolutely wear that badge as a badge of honor because, like I said, when we were speaking about who our next guest should be, Phil was like, you totally need to speak with Saba because this is her forte. So just to sort of reiterate, there is no imposter syndrome there from my perspective.
I mean, we feel same race sometimes, right? Right, Josie? I mean, we didn't choose this life. The life kind of chose us. And coming out of a need, as you were saying, from your own personal experience. It's the same reason why I made 1946. Knowing how much this personally impacts me, I felt it would have been irresponsible of me not to make this movie as a filmmaker, knowing how powerful media is. And look at now the conversations that we're having from it. So yes, wear that badge with honor. We all support you on that.
Yeah. Could I just very quickly say, actually, Lady Phil, I mean, as we know her as Phil, but for people who might think, who's Phil?
Yeah.
But Lady Phil, she's been amazing to me. She's like really encouraged me and really supported the work. And, when I went to her, and I mean, I've sat on a coalition for several years. And then I went to her and said, look, we should sit on it as UK Black Pride because, that we need that representation, especially within the Black and POC LGBT plus community, because quite often we do get left out the picture. And she was incredibly supportive. So, I just want to kind of give her flowers for that, how she does kind of support and encourage the kind of some of the crazy decisions and things that I do.
That's Phil, hey? She's always there. She's like, the matriarch of our community. And yeah, we love that about her. She's always bringing us together. That's what we love about her. So this takes us nicely into sort of the conversation which we had before the podcast and with Rocky, sort of introducing it to the different sort of advocacy stuff that happens in the UK. So for the listeners and those hearing this episode, so you're very intentional about we're going to go into the main topic here, which is around conversion practices. And the reason I say practice is because you were very intentional about not using the word therapy. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and why does the distinction matter?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, well, actually not for me, we started that the coalition was called the Conversion Therapy Coalition. And then we made the decision to change the name to practices because therapy, it falsely implies that this is something that's legitimate. It's evidence-based. It's something that, that's medically treated. And also, I think the Human Rights Associations, and I think it's the American Psychological Association, have also called it practices and not therapy. So it's very important to recognize the difference that actually we're dealing with harm, we're dealing with abuse, and this isn't something that's therapy that you go to and it's holistic. So it's giving it its true meaning. And it is a form, it is a pattern of control. I think the name kind of gives it more honesty and more recognition for what it actually is. And I know our government, whilst I'm not going to go there right now because it's too early in the conversation, but the government also refers to it as practices and not therapy. So I think it's really important to recognise that It's not therapy. Therapy is what you go to when you need to be healed, treated. You don't need therapy for abuse when it's forced on you.
Absolutely. And I suppose sort of add to that as well, Rocky, before you come in, is about words are intentional, right? And the way what is said and how it's said are important. So I appreciate you explaining that to us. Sorry, Rocky, go ahead.
No, for sure. I just actually wanted to follow up on that to kind of
Mhm.
understand what actually falls under conversion practices,
Mm.
right? Because it seems like it could be so broad and people might not really understand it. And to that end, what are some things that are misunderstood about it and which then would afford the minimization of harm?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I actually wrote something down because I thought you might ask me this and I wanted to get it absolutely right because
Yeah, it's so
for
important.
anyone who listens to this, I want them to know. So I think when you explain there, conversion practices, it ranges widely. So it can include pseudo therapeutic counseling, but it can also include prayer based interventions, deliverance sessions, coercive mentoring, familiar pressure, community led surveillance, identity of identity and behavior. So it might not always look like extreme from the outside, because sometimes it's very cleverly done, but it's quiet, it's persistent conversations, conditional acceptance. If you do this, then we'll let you do that. Spiritual manipulation, which I know you've had a conversation earlier with Rachel Rain about, I'm sure she will have touched on that.
Mhm.
But the common thread with all these different practices is the intent, that the belief that someone has to be changed, has to be corrected, or they have to be cured because there's something wrong with them, because they don't fit the narrative or society expects them to fit into. And I just want to read this short paragraph out very quickly. The definition of conversion practices also overlaps with honor-based abuse, as both stem from the belief that an individual's identity or orientation shames the family or community. And in these contexts, conversion effects are used as a tool to restore family honor, where refusal to conform can lead to severe consequences, such as physical violence, forced marriage, or total social ostracization.
Mhm.
The reason why I wanted to mention that is because I do a lot of work in the Vogue sector, especially for Black and brown women. And one of the things that I've noticed is that most people understand and recognize that conversion practice sits under honor-based abuse. I'm not going to use any phrases because it might trigger people. But when you speak to the average person, they don't realize that it does sit under honor-based abuse. So I think there's an educational piece there that it's really important for people to realize that actually, and in fact, in the government's Violence Against Women and Girls action plan that the government's written, there is actually a sentence in their action plan that recognizes conversion practices as part of honor-based abuse. So I think, for me, there's that, I talk about the educational piece a lot, but,
Mhm.
it's not just a case of, it just happens here and there or just in church. It's widely, it's done in lots of different settings.
Can I just ask, Sabo, because obviously there's a huge proportion of our listeners that are American based, and it would, I don't know whether it's appropriate, but just to ask, could you explain what honor based
Mm.
that means, just so that they understand the
Yeah,
wording?
sure. It's honor-based abuse. Generally, people think it happens in South Asian families, but it can happen in all cultures, all conservative households. So it does happen in evangelical, in Christian, in Jewish Orthodox families. So across all conservative households, and its honor is about bringing shame on your family, is making the family kind of, families need to be seen in a certain way, in a certain light. So you don't want anyone to bring shame on your family. So it's about, removing that honor. If you're going to be gay and you imagine being gay in an evangelical household, you're bringing shame on that family. The community might, disown you or think less of you. So to deal with that, there are various ways in honor-based abuse that they might deal with you. And the most extreme is killing someone, honor-based killings, which happens a lot and we hear about it across the world. It's a global issue. And some of this, lesser I mean, I don't know even a phrase to be used. It could be just like forced marriage, where you're forcing someone to marry someone of the opposite sex because marrying them will either cure them or it will remove that shame. So quite often, and I've heard this from several people, I've spoken to individuals where this has happened, is sometimes what happens is a man might be forced to marry a woman. So it looks like they're in a heterosexual relationship, but actually once they're married, he will end up being a perpetrator to his wife because he doesn't actually love her or want to be with her. And whilst abusing her, because that's what he's had to deal with, he will then go on to have, marital affairs with other men. So it's, even more perpetuating even more abuse.
Yeah, I think probably one of the saddest stories of that. Do you remember the couple that they were British, but they went on their honeymoon to Cape Town?
Yes, South Africa. Yes.
And that was, I mean, it wasn't totally proven, but the fact of the matter is that happened to her and he was found guilty, right? But that was just awful because, again, he was in the closet or closeted, but then had lots of info around that, which was a really sad case, really sad.
That's so sad.
For that, Saba, and for explaining that. Just my last bit around this really is the question around why do you think so many people misunderstand conversion therapies and minimize?
I think partly because really up until the last sort of 4 or 5 years, people haven't spoken about it. So it's always happened behind closed doors. It happens in trusted spaces. So, if it's happening in a faith setting, in a church, in a mosque, in a synagogue, in a temple, you're not going to expect that to happen. And quite often, actually, it happens in the home, where you might get someone come in the home and, practice prayer settings or exorcisms in the home as well. So people don't think that happens. So, so it can happen in the family home. It can also happen through cultural networks. So it's a very sort of closed circuit that these conversations happen in. And I think there's also some discomfort in acknowledging and accepting that this happens. So it's a kind of, if I use the example of like the abuse and what I went through as a child, I remember an elder from the community coming and speaking to me when I was about, I think 14 or 15, telling me that, my mother was my mother and I had to do whatever she said and just accept whatever she did to me. So the fact that she was physically harmful, emotionally harmful, and, was really quite, it was awful, the abuse. But I was being told you have to just accept it because she's your mother. So
Wow.
it's that kind of cultural acceptance that you just, accept it. This is what happens. Faith says, our faith, our culture says this isn't right. So you just have to accept it. And that's where the shame and the confusion comes in. I mean, I definitely wasn't confused. But not everybody has that. And if you're in a home where you've got everybody telling you that, that scene from, God, this is how my brain works. That scene with the woman in, God, I can't remember what it's called. Shame, where she's walking through the crowd going, shame, shame, shame. Where everyone's telling you that you're shameful and you're disgusting, that that doesn't go out further than your community. So a lot of people don't know what's happening. And when I speak to people now and they're like, oh, I thought it was banned. I didn't know that happens here. Or I talk about, I spoke to someone the other day and they were telling me about an exorcism that they heard of. They're like, exorcism? And I'm like, yes. And people just don't believe it. And even since I've become chair of the Banned Conversion Practices Coalition, I probably speak to 2 or 3 survivors a month. Some of them it's happened in the past and they just want to share their story. They want to speak to someone. And when they tell me about some of the stuff they've had to go through, it just doesn't make sense to me. That kind of make it make sense that it's 2026 and people are still performing exorcisms. I remember in the 80s, I was watching, those kind of horror films on a Friday night and exorcisms were happening in those. You don't expect like 40 years on that they're still but they're happening in real life. I saw them in movies. I didn't realize they were happening for real. So people need to be aware. And I think actually, if more people knew what was happening and the degree to which it was happening, more would have to be done about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Agreed.
people minimize harm because, as you said, these are accepted practices within families, and often they're accepted within the government, and we saw that in America recently where the Supreme Court just
Yeah.
ruled that conversion practices are freedom of speech. And so it falls under religious freedom. And then, as you said, people don't realize sometimes the level of actual abuse that goes on. Like exorcisms, you would not think that that happens, but most of the survivors that I've spoken with, some of the things that they have gone through, it's just like you would never imagine. Behind closed doors in a church, pulled out of their church, colleges, brought to camps, and the stories are just wild, which actually takes us into our next segment here, talking about the personal impact, the community impact, and really, I think one of the most important conversations we should be having is the survivors. And one of the questions I like the most in this section is what's often missing from the public conversations about survivors. And I think amplifying survivors' voices is really important. So maybe you can help talk a little bit about some of the real life impacts you've seen from individuals who've experienced these practices, some of the harm that shows up mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And then like let's help amplify survivors' voices so people can know and not minimize this harm anymore.
Yeah. Where do I start? Well, I mean, like I said, I'm speaking to people that it impacted them when they were younger and they're still talking about it. So we know, that it has a long-term impact. It has a profound impact on survivors. So to me, there's, complex level of trauma. We know a lot of survivors suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of the trauma. We know that childhood trauma, if it's happened to them as a young person, that leads to all kinds of illnesses as they get older, chronic pain, PTSD, there's suicidal ideation. For many people, it leads to the erosion of trust. If you can't trust your family and you can't trust your priest or the reverend or the father, who can you trust? The people that, I mean, I have a real issue with trust still, because I couldn't trust my mum. If you can't trust your mum, who do you trust? So, trust is a big one. I think, the mental health issues that you said, the depression, the loneliness, the isolation, are you ever going to be able to be intimate with someone again? All those kind of things, are massive. But I think also, for survivors, I think it's not having your voice heard is a big one. So, like I said, that I have people that reach out. Every person that reaches out to me, I'll speak to them. I'll listen. I won't speak to them. I'll listen to them. And then if I can signpost them, I'll signpost them. And I stopped saying speak because I don't, because I think as a society, we don't listen anymore. We've lost the art of listening. And I think it's really important that when survivors come forward, we don't try and fix them or tell them X, Y, and Z. We just let them speak.
Yeah.
Let them just kind of share their story, just listen to them, be compassionate, and then, try and signpost them to a professional institution or somewhere where they can maybe meet like-minded people or other survivors. There's quite a few in the UK. There are places and organisations that people can go to. I think the mental health side of it is, obviously the medical care, the long-term effect. They need to be believed. I think the government not recognising the cruelty of this abuse, I think just can't even put it into words without sort of saying the wrong thing. I think it's an injustice to survivors because it says to them that you're not worth it. We don't recognise the abuse you're going through. We don't see you as victims. Why is there a delay in banning it? Why are they allowing, free speech to continue in America? I saw that, obviously I get sent a lot of stuff. I saw the case that just happened in America, because also we know what happens in America will eventually affect the UK. And I think to me that the way the government treats the LGBT plus community is appalling. But when it comes to conversion practices, it does also affect some heterosexual people, because when it comes to mental health, for example, it is used for other means as well, not just to cure and fix people because they identify in a different way. So that, I think that's the other thing, is that I think the wider community need to realise that actually this does affect some heterosexual people as well. And on the mental health side, they've used electric shock treatment, they've used conversion practices to fix mental health, to fix if someone doesn't, the list is endless. But I think it's important to stress that it's not just LGBT plus people.
Thank you for that, Saba. And I'm just thinking about the conversation we had with Rachel Rain that you introduced us to around Surviving Universal. Is that the name of the organization?
Surviving Universal UK.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm saying it right so people know it, where there's help as well. We had a really interesting conversation, and what Rachel was leaning into was like, they don't turn anybody away regardless of what race you are. Obviously, a lot of the work they try to do and advocacy work is for people of color, because there's obviously a different situation there. But then also leaning back into what you said earlier, you sit on the board, you chair now the conversion practices committee, or is that right? Is it a
coalition?
Coalition, that's it. And to ensure that there's representation there. And then I'm also thinking around culture, faith, and intersectionality here. That's where I'm leaning into to the next question, really, is thinking about what are the unique challenges specifically to black and brown LGBTQ plus communities when it comes to conversion therapy, and why is it so specific? And also the fact that you are on this coalition, and the importance of representation within those spaces as well.
Yeah, so our coalition is about 80 organisations roughly, and a group of individuals, and they range from mental health, charities, NGOs, organisations, grassroots organisations, pride organisations. So it's a really nice cross section. Mm-hmm. So it covers everything across the board. I'm not going to start listing them because I'll miss. People think I've got my favourites, and I don't want to do that.
List them all in the show notes.
Amazing.
So nobody will get in trouble. We'll make sure, and we need to make sure we don't get in trouble too, and we include everyone. And if you're not included, we apologize. It was an accident. Anyway.
They can want to list the Conversion Coalition website, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Ban Conversion Practices website. I think, when it comes to, so like I said, that when I spoke to Lady Phil, I was quite keen that, that although I sat on the coalition independently, it was important to sit on it as UK Black Pride, because I think for Black and Brown LGBT plus communities, there's that added layer of silence and stigma that takes place. And quite often that can be rooted in fear. Because if you speak out, you're betraying your community. So it kind of goes a little bit back to what I was saying about the shame and the stigma that's attached to it. Because you don't want to betray your community. Your brought up community is so important. And especially when you're navigating sort of other types of marginalizations, you're dealing with racism, you're dealing with other types of segregation, you're dealing with misogynoir. It makes it harder if you're having to deal with conversion practices as well. So, the needs are multiple needs when you're dealing with it. So I think in some ways it almost causes like a double silence, in the sense that, individuals have to choose between their identity and their culture just for safety reasons. So I not necessarily through conversion practice, but I have heard people say that they choose their religion before their identity. So they would rather hide their identity, but they're happy to share their religion, because their religion means they're still part of their family and part of their community. But for some, obviously, that's not the case. They can't. Mm-hmm. So it perpetuates even more discourse and discomfort. And like you said, with the couple from South Africa, for some men, when they do finally come out, or if they get outed, which has been the case with some men, then all hell can break loose, because then suddenly the family kind of get, involved. And I think definitely I've heard of a couple of cases where someone's been outed I think it was in a Hindu setting, and his family, were like, this is never good, this isn't going to happen. He was in a relationship with another man, he got outed by someone, and, he ended up sort of, running away and leaving home. because they were trying to convert him, and trying to sort of deal with that, but in quite an aggressive way. So this is the thing that, for Black and brown people, you have those multiple layers that you're dealing with, but also, so you have, like, in the family, you're dealing with abuse at home. If you're spin outed, or if you're showing tendencies that are maybe effeminate for a man, or, if you're identifying in a different way than than your family expect you to be. But then outside, externally, you're facing racism, like I mentioned, misogyny. So this, it becomes a lot more complex, I think, when it comes to those families. I think I just think it becomes a lot harder, and people that have those multiple layers, need safety, they need affirming spaces, and they need a kind of more holistic setting and approach to help them.
Yeah. These all sound everything as you're talking. I can think, and I'm seeing these conversion practices and these themes impact so many different people. These are universal themes, and they do play out differently within each group, but the same cycle keeps happening over shame, fear, having to live and be a certain way, having to walk a certain way, all these different things, and then putting
Yes.
that pressure on not only the family, then it trickles down to the kid. And another thing that I kept thinking about is, wouldn't it be wonderful why we're having these conversations, so we can start amplifying the voices, the harm, and really, when you think about it, look at the difference, right? We've got shame, fear, exclusion, and then we have love, beauty, hope, all of these wonderful, beautiful words that actually
Acceptance.
give us and affirm us, that then don't cause us to, like you said, perpetuate harm and cause more harm down the line, because you're living in a box and you're living inauthentically, that causes more harm.
It's the ostracization as well that comes with Black. I mean, believe it or not, I'm still ostracized from my entire community. Bar two families, like, literally, if there's a big event, so I'm very close to my family, but if there's like a big family event or something, literally 3/4 of that room will not even make eye contact with me. And I find it hilarious. I find it really amusing. We'll say to me and my sister are very close. And I've said to my sister a few times, like, why don't they just say hello to me, or just look at me? Like, it's been so many years, like, it's been decades. And she's like, they just don't know what to say to you. And I'm like, but that's ridiculous. But,
And all you can do is laugh.
yeah, I do laugh, because I think it's, and I think they're also really confused, because I'm so close to my brother and sister now, and like my nephews and that. In their head, they're like, we don't get it. Like, how did this happen?
Yeah. Well, that's so sad that, who knows what's going on in their minds. Maybe they just want to give you a big hug. And yeah, instead of crying, sometimes we laugh. Go ahead, Joe.
Gonna say, I think sometimes in those situations, people are embarrassed, and because such a long time, they just don't know how to bridge the gap. I think it's that, it's a bit of that, and pride as well, of just being like, do you know what? This is so silly. We're family. Yeah. So it's sometimes like embarrassment of like something that's so insignificant, and they just don't know how to just bridge the gap and be like, let's move on.
It's not easy being queer, is it? Let alone having to have the whole religious thing behind you as well.
Keep showing up, though.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, all of us. I mean, everyone. I applaud everyone.
Yep. Yep. Well, I think we're going to lean into this next section here, because you mentioned earlier, when you're sharing these stories, people in the UK are still coming to you and saying, well, I thought these were banned practices. And as we talked, and we know what's going on in the United States, they're not really all banned. So maybe for our US audience, and then enlightening our UK audience as well, what is currently happening in the United Kingdom around banning conversion practices? Are they banned? Are they not banned? Is it soft? What does that look like? And then can you compare it to the US if you know anything about the US? And if not, we can maybe fill in those gaps. And then why would legal bans, why are they so important?
Oh, do you know, this question kind of makes me want to cry. Yeah, it just makes me want to cry. We're into our 8th year of being promised that the ban would happen. And this is only a draft published ban. It's not even the actual ban. So we're in our 8th year. The government recently announced that they're going to prorogue Parliament. So it means that Parliament will end soon, week of the 27th of April. So in the Labour government's manifesto, they promised a conversion practices ban, that they would implement it. And up until a month ago or so, a couple of months ago, I was at an event in February during LGBT History Month, and we were being promised by MPs saying, no, it's in the manifesto, it's going to happen. Constantly being told it's going to happen. We've got, 2 weeks left? It's not going to happen. I mean, if it happens, drinks are on me. I mean, I don't drink, so, you're all getting water, but it's on me. And it is so frustrating because the year before last, like with the coalition, we kept being told it's going to happen in April. It's going to happen in August. It's going to happen in December. So it just felt like we're constantly being let down. And then when we met with the Minister of Equalities last June, who was looking after the ban, the bills, I said to her, I don't want any dates. I don't want to be told it's going to happen at this time. I just want to know when it's actually happening. Because going back to a coalition, going back to individuals and saying, it's going to happen now, it's false promises. And I'm not that kind of a person. It's either happening or it's not. I don't want to know. I don't do dangling carrots. And I just feel really frustrated. And I also feel really disappointed because, Labour came in and we had such high hopes that, okay, after a Conservative government, they didn't do anything for the LGBT plus community. We kind of almost understood that, okay, it's because they're Conservatives. It's a Tory government. They don't care about us. They never have and never will. But with Labour coming in, I really thought, I genuinely thought that they would make a difference.
Yeah.
But they kind of showed their true colours within a few days with the puberty blocker ban. And I just feel when it comes to the LGBT plus community, they failed us in every area. So I feel very, very let down by them. Kind of, someone asked me, it doesn't demotivate me. It actually makes me want to fight harder, which is, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. It kind of ignites a little bit of a fire in my belly because I'm like, actually, you're not going to get away with this. So it's very, very frustrating because it should have happened. They promised a fully inclusive, with no religious loopholes. That's what was promised. That's what they, should be delivering. It's not happened this year. We've got 2 weeks. Otherwise, they'll be going into our 9th year of a bill being promised. 9 years. 9 years people have been waiting. And the really annoying thing is after conversion practices, coercive control, the abuse, the physical abuse, the mental abuse, all these things are banned in other areas. So why can't they be banned here? What is it about this particular bill? And the only thing that we can think of, or I can think of, is because this is the first LGBT plus bill. There's never been an LGBT plus bill. Everything else that's banned is banned under another bill. So recently, the LGBT hate crimes becoming aggregated hate crimes came under the police and crime bill. So they weren't a standalone LGBT plus bill.
Yeah.
So my feeling is that they just don't care about the LGBT plus community. They just don't give it enough kudos and respect that it deserves, or we deserve as a community, to actually see it as a standalone bill. So we're having conversations and discussions. We're definitely, activation in terms of what we're doing. Like I said, I'm feeling more galvanized, and we're bringing on new members to the coalition. We're definitely going to be doing more. So I feel very strongly, and I feel very disappointed with our government not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, then that could lead into we know why it's important to ban conversion practices. I think it's so pivotal that you continue your mission, and you're not a silly person for it. We applaud you for it.
Well, I mean, they asked us for case studies. They asked us for information last year, which we provided all of that. Which they asked us to provide it again because after the Conservative government, their information they had was sealed. So we provided that. And like I said, that I speak to people all the time. We know it happens. It's like they don't need more evidence. They just need to pass the bloody ban.
It's so interesting to think that that little bit of language change in the bill could have that much of an impact, but it makes sense. I mean, look at what they just did in America. They used ChatGPT and 20-year-olds to Google LGBTQ, and anything that said LGBTQ was smashed.
Yeah. I mean, I blame Boris Johnson. I can't stand the man, and I'm happy to say it on record. Because he was the one that removed the trans inclusion from the bill. Otherwise, it may have gone through. So it was actually April 2022 when the ban conversion practices protest took place in London, which saw massive protests taking place against the bill. So we know that there's an appetite out there. But again, it's, that was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of re-galvanize that. And as a coalition, we are working on a few things, a few community events to do stuff as well, which will be great.
Can I ask, Saba, and I don't know if I missed it, but you were saying about 2 weeks' time we'll have a bit more information, right, about whether this are they waiting for so basically there's local elections happening.
So basically when Parliament ends, that means the session will have finished, so they can't pass any bills or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, so Labour will still remain in government until the general election, but it means that if the session ends after the week of the 27th of April, then that means that they can't pass a bill in this session in this year. Yeah, and I think with America, there is it's a lot more fragmented and hostile because of your legal protections, and that's because of all the challenges due to your current president. I don't even want to take his name.
Don't.
So I think 20 states have banned it, but the rest it's unbanned. That's really bad English. But I think, yeah, you mentioned the ruling of the, is it Chiles and Salazar? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The court case that just happened, which takes down the restrictions citing the First Amendment, so protections for talk therapy, which is just ridiculous. And I think there's a judge that is challenging that, so it'll be interesting to know what happens about that. And I think the shift of the federal government to erase all transgender identities, which is very prevalent and happening at warp speed for my liking and is just absolutely abhorrent. It kind of mandates conversion practices, especially within like prison systems and things, for example. So it's quite scary when you think about conversion practices. Yeah, so I think the fact that LGBT rights are being systematically dismantled in the USA, it doesn't bode well and creates quite a dangerous picture when it comes to conversion practices, because it's almost giving license to people there to do as they please, which, gives people rights over mental health and bodily autonomy because they're not given any rights or any support and that they've got nowhere to turn. And it does kind of worry me. Like I said, we always keep an eye on what's happening in the US because, like I said, it does have a trickle-down effect here. And we know that some of the very staunch groups that are gender critics that are fighting against the rights here for LGBT plus people are actually funded by some of the evangelical groups in America. I'm happy to say that online they can come after me. I've had enough people come after me this time.
Well, we only speak truth here, and people can deal with the facts the way they see. So, people only need to Google things, and they'll find the information there. So what you're saying is not untrue.
No. I mean, everything I said is actually factually correct. That is statistically approved. So I don't make my stuff up.
Yeah.
It's not scaremongering, it's truth.
So, I mean, you've mentioned some really good points through this conversation so far, Saba, and I'm thinking about sort of the advocacy work and change work that's happening for us to change the system. Work that the conversion therapy, no, let me not say therapy, conversion practices coalition. Yes, exactly, conversion coalition. So I want to know, what does day-to-day look like for the coalition? There's a load of organizations which people can see on the website that are part of this coalition. How are you using your platform when it comes to resistance and pushing back and really lobbying and advocating. Like, tell us about some of the good work that's happening within the coalition.
Thank you. Yeah, I love the coalition. It's just such an amazing group of organisations and individuals that are so committed to the cause. I'm so proud to sort of work with them. And I said from the very beginning that I don't sort of see it as me leading. I see this as a collaboration, that we're all working together. I'm not precious, and I'm not that way. Like, this is my, that's not me at all. So it's very much working together. And like I said, we're a cross section of organisations. We have some legal experts, medical people. We all want meaningful change. So I'm very lucky to also be supported by an amazing strategy group who take care of a lot of the policy side and legislative side. They know all the sort of parliamentary jargon and, legislation side of things, which is amazing. And I want to give a shout out to Phoebe, because she looks after she's a campaigns manager for Stonewall, but she looks after all our comms and social media. And she's been absolutely pivotal and brilliant in promoting the coalition and getting community involved and getting coverage and pushing our, who we are out there and getting people's voices heard.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done, a lot of what I've done without her support and the strategy and coalition support. And I think at the moment, our focus is obviously getting the ban put through. So we're doing like a bit of a countdown to the government session ending and just highlighting the fact that another year, no ban, welcome to the 9th year of nothing.
Yeah.
And the King's speech is supposed to take place on the 12th or 13th of May.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see if he mentions conversion practices in that. So we've had conversion practices mentioned in the previous Queen's 2 speeches. He mentioned it in his last King's speech so it'll be interesting to see if it's still on the agenda when he does that on the 12th or 13th of May. But our work is very much about pushing the ban over the line. That's the most important thing. That's why we were set up. That's what our goal is. But in the meantime, we're also helping to amplify survivor voices, collating information. We're doing a survey at the moment. Why conversion practices matters to community and to everybody and anybody out there. So you don't have to be from the LGBT plus community, because conversion practices, whilst it might happen to someone from the community, how does that affect your siblings, your family, other people, your work colleagues? Because one of the things that, like I said, that when I've spoken to survivors, I've spoken to a lot of people that are in their kind of early 30s, maybe sort of around that age, late 30s, where they've realised that what they went through, they're only kind of dealing with it at that age. They've come to realise that what they actually went through when they were younger was conversion practices. And it's taken them a long time they've either not realised what happened to them was conversion practices, or it's just been blocked out their memory and something's triggered it and brought it to the surface. So obviously, if that's happening and you're dealing with past trauma, at that age, you're more likely working in a setting, an office setting, in a company setting. So that's going to have knock-on effects to your work environment. So I've spoken to quite a few people that are dealing with trauma, but also working at the same time. So it affects your work colleagues as well. So the survey is to really kind of get ideas from everyone. And I've been invited by a few organisations, a couple of corporations, and actually gone in and spoken to them about how they can deal with conversion practices and people that have been affected by conversion practices, dealing with staff, making sure that it sits in their policy under domestic abuse so that they can recognise it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Is there a place on your website where audience members could donate, volunteer, get involved?
So we don't have donations as such, but if people want to get involved, I mean, the most important thing is they can subscribe, follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn. So we made the decision to come off Twitter earlier this year because I refused to be on that platform. So, subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram, Ban Conversion Practices. And what we ask is for people to just reshare our posts, really like, comment, reshare so that, the message just goes out wider. And we want to reach as many people as possible because who knows where someone might see something. I mean, I spoke to someone the other day that I've actually known for years, and he mentioned that he'd been through conversion practices. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he said, yeah, I've never really talked about it. And I was completely blown away that I've known you for years and you've never mentioned it. I mean, obviously I didn't say that, but
Right.
now I've come to realize that for some people it takes time for them to come out. But if, the reason why I wanted to mention Phoebe is that she's done such a brilliant job of making us visible, making people's voices visible, that I think it's really important that people know that actually this is a place for you to be seen and heard. If survivors want to come forward, we're really happy for survivors to reach out to us. I mean, we get a lot of, not that many, but at times we do get media requests to speak to survivors. So, I'll put them in touch with survivors, those that want to sort of speak on camera, off camera. The most important thing, like I said to you right at the beginning, for me, it's amplifying the voice of the voiceless. So it's not about me speaking, it's about amplifying other people's voices. I just kind of see myself as the fixer.
2 quick questions here before we do our final question. I'm wondering if there's anything else you would want our listeners to know that you might not have talked about, that we could end on a positive note of hope and fill the room with those love and inclusion words instead of fear and shame. And then another kind of question around action and hope is, yes, survivors' voices need to be amplified, but we need our ally voices. So how can allies show up authentically and in meaningful ways?
Yeah, I think for me, hope is increasing visibility and leadership of those survivors. So literally what I've just said is displaying those courageous testimonies, dismantling silence, not letting people feel like they're oppressed, giving people permission to speak, empowering them, letting them know that there is absolutely nothing wrong with them. That video of that judge with that young lad whose dad was going to pay $6,000 to cure him. What she said was incredible. I can't remember her name, Judge Williams or something. I can't remember, but but that, inspiration for everyone, young, old, whatever age, because this affects everyone of any age. Let's be honest. You are beautiful. You are absolutely fine as you are. There is nothing wrong with you. Love yourself. You don't need someone else to love you. If you can learn to love yourself, learn to accept yourself, learn to recognize the value in you, do you know that's enough?
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to be able to love you the way you love yourself. And sometimes seeking approval from others, it just isn't always enough. And you could end up just constantly searching. And I think I'm in my 50s now. So it's, I'm lucky that I'm older and maturer. But once I learned to love myself, and it took me decades to get there, and a lot of therapy. But once I learned to love myself, I didn't need to be validated by another person. I didn't need anyone else to tell me that. So I think, what I would say to, listeners is, learn to love other people, learn to see the good in other people. There's enough evil and horrible stuff happening in the world today. I don't want to ignore some of the plight that people are going through, some of the genocide and the evil that's happening in the world today. I totally understand it. I don't want to ignore it, but I think at the same time, we also need to look at the good in others. I make it a bit of a mission of mine. If I'm on public transport, if I see someone that looks a bit down, or I just smile at them. And, just really little things like just smiling at someone can just make their day. And I've had only once in my life, I had someone say to me, oh my God, you've just made my day by smiling at me. A lot of times people look at me like I'm a complete weirdo, but that's fine. But you don't know what's happening to someone. You don't know who's going through conversion practice abuse, going through that abuse. So I think it's just having that open mind and being nice. And you ask about advocacy or allyship, wasn't it? I think allyship is pretty much the same thing, is, speak out for others. If you see someone that has kind of withdrawn or looks a bit disheveled or has become quiet, and normally they're quite lively, speak to them, ask them, talk to them. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to ask that question. Kindness goes a really long way. Do something nice. In fact, with a couple of my friends are going through it at the moment. They're going through a really tough time. I send them random pictures of animals, because sometimes words aren't enough, and sometimes we don't know the right thing to say to people. But I send like funny animal pictures, like really cute, cuddly ones sometimes like really random, weird ones. But I know it'll make them smile, and that's joy. I think we need to add more joy in this world.
Great.
Because there is a lot of suffering. So yeah, I can feel myself like about to go on a whole tyrant of what allyship could look like. But I think the most important thing is speak up for injustice. If you've got a voice, use it. If you've got privilege, use it. If you've got entitlement, use it in the right way. Don't be an egotistical idiot or a moron. I love the word moron at the moment. I'm bringing moron back. So don't be, apparently, in case anyone complains, that's a word from a Latin word that is allowed to be used.
It is Saba vetted, data approved.
It's a historian friend of mine. She looked it up and she said, no, it comes from, I think it's either a Greek word or a Latin word. And historically it was used. So it's okay.
It's a good word. I like it.
It's a great word. We're surrounded by them. So
Better than the words TikTok Jesus used that I had to blur out in the last episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that this has kind of brought us to a beautiful ending, really. You use the words love, hope, kindness, speaking up, voice for the voice of the voiceless. Such beautiful words to sort of resonate just, this beautiful episode. And I'm also just thinking about loving yourself, because it's stuff you, right? And dare I say, if what RuPaul likes to say at the end, if you can love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anybody else? Can I get an amen in here?
Amen.
Let's start with loving ourselves first. And so to end us nicely, and in a way that we always ask all our guests on our podcast episodes, Saba, is around the word home. And the reason I'm saying this is because the intro song for our podcast and closing song is
Yes.
actually by Rocky's cousin. And
Wow.
we both sort of went between different songs, and we chose this one because we felt it represents really what we're trying to create here. And that's around community, love, and so on. And so the question I'm going to throw at you is, what does home mean to you? And especially around someone navigating all these different identities and culture and work, where do you find home?
Wow. What I love that question.
It's a bit profound. It's also beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking that people are going to probably be surprised, but home for me is my sanctuary. It's when I come home, literally, even when I finish working and I'm just sat on my own, away from everyone, just with myself. That's where I find the most peace and quiet. I love being with people, but I also don't like being with people. So I think home for me is yeah, it's just coming home to me, knowing that I'm safe, knowing that I've got, my sanctuary. That the home I'm in at the moment, I've been here for like over 20 years.
Wow.
I think I always say this sounds it's a terrible way to end, but I think I'll be leaving in like a casket or a black bag, because this is my home. This is my forever home. And it's where I feel safe. Nobody knows where I live. I'm hidden away. In fact, Lady Phil said, like, you need a passport to come and visit me, because I'm just like in no man's land. But yeah, home is definitely where I can just be at complete ease, where I feel safe, where I've got time to just be me without any judgment, without having to perform, without having to mask, without having to entertain or say anything or do anything. I can just completely 100% authentically be myself.
I love that. That's a good way to end. And, I think you were the only guest who says home is where you come back to yourself. I love that. It's a beautiful way to end, of course,
Yes, it's all about me.
No, but it has to start with you. If you don't look after yourself, how will you
Yeah.
find the energy to go and do the work that you do? You do so much of the work out there. So it only makes coming back to yourself and centering yourself before you can then get up and go and do the work outside again. So I appreciate saying that, and I get it. Like, all the work that you do, incredible. And thank you so much for the work that you do in the community. Without people like yourself, we wouldn't be where we are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've loved this. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great.
There's a way to escape from this pain. You don't have to fall away. You don't have to learn to stay as you bow your tears to pray.